So I introduced before my colleague and friend, Rabbi Louis Warshauer, and I thought that a way to make the High Holy Day services a little bit more engaging would be to do some variety in the way that Cantor Barber has invited people to do some singing with her at various times. And so I invited Rabbi Warshauer to participate in a conversation with me this morning. Rabbi Warshauer was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Those of you who come around on Shabbat, he's not new to you. He's been coming here for as long as I've been with the community, and I'm sure that he will continue to come. So thank you for spending the High Holy Days with us and for teaching this morning and on Yom Kippur. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Katz, Amy, and to the entire Bethel community. It's good to be here once again. I hope to be back at such time as we can be together in person, but in the meantime, I'm happy to be here with all of you in a virtual way. Rabbi Katz and I were talking, and we know that this year is very different from others. On Rosh Hashana, we should be speaking particularly about what should we be moving forward toward in the coming year, but particularly in this year of the pandemic. What would you say to the congregation that we should be moving toward?
So I was taken by an article that Rabbi Chaim Herring wrote about a spiritual vaccine to immunize ourselves. And I started to think about what a great metaphor and what a wonderful way to think about what are the things that we can do to protect ourselves to move forward, knowing that 5781 is a tough year to get going. So what I want to do is I want to think about what would be the components of this spiritual vaccine.
I wonder about the use of the word vaccine, since we're not, in matters of spiritual, we're not talking so much about science, but rather about the spirit, and whether in times that our spirits are troubled, there is something that would be a vaccine that could immunize ourselves against the troubles that our spirits hold.
Well, and as you said to me before, a vaccine, you go to CVS, you get it, and you're good. Like, I got my vaccine for shingles, I'm good. And I realize your point is well taken. There's not a spiritual practice that you take and you're set. And that way, this is a little bit like an exercise routine. It's not like I can go to the gym and be fit and never have to worry again. It's a practice. So what I want to do is think about practices that we can cultivate that will allow us to navigate what is, we know, going to be a difficult year because it's starting out difficult. But I think your point is quite well. I want to point out that the spiritual practices that I'm going to suggest come from Pirkei Avot. And as you know, Pirkei Avot that was edited in the year 200, those teachings came from a time when the Jewish world was in crisis. And so a little bit I want to say, our tradition knows how to do crises, and our tradition offers us the wisdom to navigate. So with that in mind, the first practice I want to think about is the power of community. Hillel says, Al tifros min hatzibor, don't separate yourself from the community. Well, what does don't separate yourself from the community look like when we have to be physically distancing ourselves and we have to be separating ourselves and we can't walk down the aisles of the Cantor Morton Shame Sanctuary and pause and grab someone and say, how are you? And so there I want to say to be a part of a community is to reach out in different ways. And in particular, what I want to say, you've stayed connected with your friends. What about your community? What about the person who, it's not that you would have them over for dinner, but boy, when you see them at shul, you're really happy to see them and you care about them. And I want to invite the congregation to think about those individuals and to reach out to those people, or to think about getting on a Zoom call, not because you need the Zoom minion, but because the people on the Zoom minion need you. Because just hearing someone say, Amy, how are you? How have you been? It feels good and it makes a difference. And we really need to work on supporting the community now even more than ever. And one piece I want to say about community is I want to think about when my children would leave camp, and they would cry at the end and say, oh, so sorry. And I said to them, you're going to stay in touch with your friends, to which they rightly so would rebuke me and say, yes, but I'm never going to have this again. What was the this they were talking about? They were talking about the 400 or 500 kids that went to camp with them singing, that just walking in the camp and seeing people who knew them and cared for them. They weren't crying because they were saying goodbye to their friends. And so I look at this and I say, how do we capture and hold on to community? And to you, I want to say, think about that and devote yourself to that and make a phone call to someone who's not your friend but who you care about. And if you need their phone number, call me. I'll give it to you, because that's what we need to do to stay connected.
What you're saying reminds me of another passage that we've spoken from the Mishnah, and it's describing some of the rituals of ancient times in which the worshipers would go into the temple as it then stood in Jerusalem, and most of them were coming in from the right and walking around, and there were some people who would come in from the left and walk that way, and it was the obligation of the people the majority who would come in one way, to say to the other people, you're coming and walking in a different way. How are you? And it would give those people an opportunity to respond. Some of them would be in mourning. Some of them had lost a loved one. Some of them had been excluded from the community. And it gave the majority of the people the chance to wish them well, and in fact to pray for them and pray that their own hearts be open to those people. This strikes me as an example of something that we can put into effect today in terms of noticing people who have become isolated through this whole process.
And keeping them in mind and doing our best to reach out. So community is my first answer when you say, well, what can we do to navigate the way? And the last thing I want to say about community is be careful how it's used, because Peloton isn't really a community. Like, the word community is used cheaply lots of times, but community is a group of people that share values and share a connection and share a past and a vision for the future. It's not people you exercise with. Those might be friends. It's a different understanding of community, and especially people that you don't even see or know a connection to. Bethel is a community, and we work hard to develop it and nurture it. The second way that I want to think about how can you gird yourself moving forward is another teaching from Pirkei Avot, and that is Dan l'chav zchut. Give people the benefit of the doubt. These are challenging times. I was in Costco last week and I saw somebody who didn't have their mask on, and I started to get agitated and I started to get judgmental. And the truth of the matter is, if I had paused and taken a breath, maybe this person was having a hard time breathing. Actually, the person was older. Maybe that's what it was. But my instinct, and I had to stop myself, was to get angry. And anger actually isn't going to help anybody get through this pandemic. If we can be generous, and there are some people who are going to navigate the pandemic differently. Some people have decided to include in their pod their children and their grandchildren, and so they don't have masks. Okay, they're not bad people. They want to live a good life too. They've chosen to do it this way. And if you've chosen to not be with your grandchildren or your children, or not to have anybody in your porch, okay. If we could just look at others and say, they're doing what they think is right, and I'm going to do what I think is right, without the judgment and without the anger. And that goes back to when I think about when there were some demonstrations, earlier in the summer. Some people wanted to go, and oh, that's horrible. And I think if we could just give ourselves permission to say, we're all doing the best we can. And that doesn't mean that because they're not wearing a mask, you have to not. That's not the point. It's to assume the best in other people and assume that people are making decisions about flying, about practicing physical distancing differently, but they're doing it with their circumstances and their priorities. You don't have to accept it, you don't have to agree, but if you could just keep the volume down as opposed to getting upset. And I don't know if you've experienced that in your interactions with people?
Well, quite a bit. And the principle that you mentioned, dan l'chaf zchut, to look at and to approach people with an attitude of generosity and trying to find out, to discern a good motive. I know I question the use of the word vaccine. I wonder whether I could bring up the word antidote as dan l'chaf zchut, to look at people with a generous eye as a kind of antidote to cynicism.
I think that's a wonderful notion. And I want to just say, so now we've talked about community, we've talked about having a charitable heart. The last thing I wanted to do, and Pirkei Avot talks about it, Pirkei Avot says, speak little, do a lot. In other words, don't sit on the phone or FaceTime or Zoom or sit outside with your friends and say, what are they doing? Why are, that constant kind of critical, what's the matter? And I use an example when we sent a letter out saying that we were not going to have in-person services. I know there was like a lot of chatter. What's the matter? Why aren't they doing it? Other synagogues are doing that. It's a combination of charitable heart. Assume we're trying to do the very best for the community and we want to do right by you. But also, ask what you can do to be a part of the solution. Right? The rabbis actually understood that it's easy to sit back and complain and criticize what institutions, what school districts are doing. That's not actually helping you, and that's not bringing healing to the world. And it's funny, because I was just on the Machzor, as the cantor was chanting for us Aleinu, there was a piece from Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Rav, and it says, if you see what needs to be repaired and how to repair it, then you have found a piece of the world that God has left for you to complete. And I just love this idea of, you don't have to sit back aimless and hopeless and bored. There's actually a lot that you can be doing, and many of our congregants are the ones that have seen to it that we have brought healing and a balm to the congregation. From the Seder in the box and so many things that we've done, they haven't all been my ideas. In fact, most have not. They've come from you, and they've come from you saying, I want to make a difference because I really care about this community, and I care about people, and I want to see how to make a difference. And so that seems like a very important piece. And I really want to, I don't know if you want to add anything before I conclude.
Well, what you're saying makes me think that the advice and the good steps that you're focusing on for a period of crisis are something that we need to keep up for what we hope and pray will be the post-crisis period, going into the future, that all these are good steps that we need to, in your words of action, keep taking action toward.
Yes, they're practices. Okay, so it's not a vaccine. They're practices that we have to cultivate. And the last thing I need to say is we have a congregant who I just adore, and this young person reached out to me in the crisis, and they'd been doing a lot of reading from the Buddhist tradition. And I redirected them to some Jewish reading, because what I want to say is these practices are ours. They've been ours for 2,000 years. Yesterday I talked about hope and the need to have courage to be hopeful. Today we talked about community, about having a charitable heart, about doing something and not just sitting back. Those are authentically Jewish practices, and what I'm actually saying is, if you want to figure out how to get through the pandemic, practice Judaism. And I'm not in this instance saying light Shabbos candles, say Kiddush, although I do that, and it is a practice that helps me get through the pandemic, but I'm not talking ritual here. I'm talking about character cultivation, and I'm saying to you, our tradition gives you the tools to cultivate character, and that character will help you navigate the complicated times and the good times. And I'm happy to talk more about it with anybody who wants further discussion, and I want to thank you for helping me flesh this out prior and this morning as well.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.